Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about the right-wing civil war, and we're going to ask: Is the right like just deliberately trying to destroy itself at this point? Because obviously, it's not as if the thing that used to unify many different factions of the right has gone away. Woke progressivism is still there. Leftism is still there. The things that we were commonly referring to as problematic and degeneracy and threats to Western civilization are still there. But as per SOP, the right has decided that it's now time to focus almost exclusively internally and to do whatever we can to destroy ourselves. And today I'm going to address some of the things that I've been seeing. And here's the thing I want everyone to understand about what I'm trying to do here, because I'm going to mention certain individuals by name, and we're going to go through ways that they approach it. But the other thing that I'm going to point out is that there are other people on the right that are addressing the same issue as these individuals, but they're doing it in a way that I completely understand and I feel like is in line with at least what used to be conservative ways of thinking. And one of the things that conservatism has typically prided itself on is this idea as a commitment to objective truth, objective morality, and then using processes like the laws of logic, right? The law of identity, the law of excluded middle, the law of non-contradiction, in order to analyze evidence and come to reasonable conclusions. And there are times where we disagree because sometimes the evidence isn't conclusive. But there's still supposed to be this commitment to processes. So it really is, what is the standard for truth as we analyze these things? Because there's other people on the right now where I'm looking at some of the tactics that are being used. I'm going to mention them specifically, that I feel like this is a left-wing tactic that is being used to try to achieve a right-wing purpose. And is this a case of fighting fire with fire? Or is this a case of adopting tactics that will eventually undermine and erode the principles of the things that we're hopefully fighting for? And there's no way to do this without making people mad. So I accept that right off the bat. The only thing I would ask you to analyze, maybe you disagree with my assessment of a particular individual or a particular individual's arguments, totally fine with that. But what I'd like to challenge people to do is that insofar as that you think I'm incorrect, please present evidence in accordance with some of the things that I'm laying out here. Because the tools that I'm talking about, the laws of logic, I don't own these. Conservatives don't own these. Right? The laws of logic just exist. They're things that they're not things that we developed, they're things that we discovered. Right? And so if we can hold to some sort of common commitment to a standard for truth and objectivity, then by all means come in here and show me how I'm wrong. And I'll accept that. But there's got to be something. Because if the right now is all about, well, we're going to achieve right-wing objectives by any means, what I would suggest to you is that will eventually fail. Because part of what the right wing is trying to preserve is objective standards for truth and morality. Right? The left, especially from the critical theorist mode, from the postmodernist mode, they're the ones that say, no, there's no truth. There's your truth. There's my truth. Right? They're the ones that attempt to break everyone down by oppressor and oppressed, and then essentially rob you of any moral legitimacy if they put you in the oppressor category. We can't do that and actually sustain what we want. And so that's the argument I'm going to try to make, because I see certain people here that I've considered allies in the past. Some people not, but I've seen certain people I've considered allies in the past, or I've appreciated the work that they've done. And so I'm going to try to be respectful, but I feel like we're veering off into a direction that I certainly can't follow. So let's go ahead and jump into it. All right. First things first, Candace Owens. And the thing that I want to address with Candace Owens is obviously the whole Charlie Kirk investigation. Her suggesting that, the official story with Tyler Robinson is not accurate or is a cover-up. And the first thing I want to say right off the bat is anybody that questions the official narrative with respect to Tyler Robinson, I understand. In fact, I'm going to mention an individual that is also questioning some of the narratives with respect to Tyler Robinson, whose analysis thus far, I think, makes sense. I understand what he's saying. I understand the arguments that he's using. But I've got to the point where I don't really understand the arguments Candace Owens is using, at least through the lens of conducting an investigation. And to give you a little bit of background for myself, I used to be in 18 Fox. I used to be a Special Forces intelligence sergeant. And part of what I did as a member of a Special Forces A team, or an ODA, was I would gather intel and evidence in order to build a targeting packet for a bad guy that we were going to go get, or to assault certain elements within a network that we were trying to take down. And so I had to do this both from a logical standpoint of what makes sense for us to go and actually engage in operations, right? What is actionable intelligence? Because you can have all kinds of information that might be useful, might not be useful. It could be a distraction, but that didn't mean it was actionable, right? So I could get all the data in the world about a particular individual that I thought was doing bad things. But what differentiated the two forms, right? One form of intelligence was about proving that this individual was a bad guy. And the other was about gathering information that was sufficient for us to go and action that target. And then in 2008 in Iraq, not only did I have to have sufficient evidence to prove the guy was bad, but then I had to have sufficient evidence in order to justify why we were launching a particular operation at a particular date, at a particular place for a particular individual. I then had to bring that back, and I would have to argue before the JAG, the Judge Advocate General, on why my information was sufficient for that person to go up to higher detention. The only reason I mention all of this is that I have some experience with this. And what's interesting is my father, who was a homicide detective in the LAPD, he obviously had a lot of experience with tracking down murderers, etc. And he was one of the guys I would go to actually hone my own skills before I would go to Iraq, because a lot of what we were doing at some level looked a lot more like police work than it did fighting a conventional war. And so all of that to just explain that I don't have any problem with someone questioning the official narrative. I don't have any problem with someone chasing down new and interesting leads or bringing in important information, which may take us on a different route from whatever the official narrative is. But if you're going to imply things, then there needs to be sufficient evidence to actually do that. And I posted this a while back, and it was reflective of the way I thought about what was going on, especially with the way that Candace was doing some of the things that she was. And so this is, I'll just put this up there and you guys can kind of see for yourself. I said, so I'm going to be doing a lot of tabling events with TPUSA this year. And I just want to put something out there just in case. If something bad were to happen and someone claiming to be my friend implicated my wife in my death without any real evidence, just vibes, I would hope to God that you would support my wife instead of a malicious hack making millions by perpetuating half-baked conspiracy theories while trying to destroy the most important person in the world to me. Now, here's what I'll say. There's a lot of people who looked at that and said, Nick, that is a horrible misrepresentation of what Candace Owens is actually doing. And then basically you just did a caricature of it. And so I'm gonna say, okay, well, what's a different way that I could explain this? So I was obviously, that was very incendiary, and I admit that. But I want to point something out, right? When you look at the various people that Candace has implicated in this, she's implicated Turning Point USA, she's implicated the FBI for suppressing evidence, pressuring authorities to close the case quickly. She's implicated the Israeli government and Zionists. She's implicated the French government and specifically the French Foreign Legion. She's implicated the Egyptian government and military. She's implicated Erica Kirk, not for like directly killing Charlie, but being somehow in on it. She's implicated Bill Ackman. She's implicated Emmanuel Macron. She's implicated Phil Lyman. She's implicated Brian Harpole. She's implicated certain unnamed current TPUSA employees and staff. That's a lot of implications. That's a lot of implications. And some people will say, well, Nick, they could all be involved. It could all be a mass conspiracy. That is theoretically possible. The question is what are the receipts, right? What is the evidence that has been brought in order to verify that? And there's a lot of people are going to say, well, Nick, that's very difficult to do. I agree. I agree that it can be very, very difficult to launch a complex investigation of an organization, especially when you're talking about potentially multiple organizations working in tandem with one another in order to facilitate the murder of a beloved figure within the conservative movement. I understand that can be complex. The question that I would ask you, though, is this the way you would go about an investigation if you really wanted to protect your sources, if you really wanted to gather the information so the organizations that you're implicating, maybe don't know that you're investigating them closely? Because what happens if you start talking about unnamed sources? If you take specific information and you say this came from an unnamed source, understand something. The people that you're investigating, know the people that had access to really critical information. That's usually a smaller group of people. And so you saying I have an unnamed source that gave me this causes the people you're investigating to actually close the doors and close people out of the inner circle. The other thing that happens is when you start to say, I'm investigating this and I'm investigating this and I'm investigating this, what you're doing is you're letting everybody know that you're investigating, that you're targeting them, you're going after them, which causes them to perhaps destroy evidence, to perhaps hide things, to perhaps engage in subterfuge in order to kind of get their story straight. You get my point here, right? Like if you really think there's this massive cabal of people working together, what you actually want to do is work with your sources and not reveal anything until you have sufficient information to make a good case. Because again, every time you leak a little bit of information here or a little bit of information there, you are letting the people you're investigating know that you're on to them, right? So if you really do believe you have a good case, if you really do believe that you're chasing things down in the way that it needs to be chased down, then why would you make the people you're investigating aware of all of that? And this is something where, again, I want to bring this up because I think it's relevant. And this is a compilation of Candace Owens basically telling everybody, oh, we're super close. We're super close. You know, I've got the receipts. We're super close. So let's just go ahead and take a look at how many times this has been featured by Candace as she says this.
To something, keep going. And we are definitively getting closer to what took place on that day. And we are getting closer. I think we're close. We are definitively getting closer. We're getting close. We're getting low. Very close. We're inching ever closer. We are now, I believe, extremely close to solving this thing. As I get inch closer and closer to discovering the truth, I've got a feeling about that. We're close. We're getting closer to something, and that something is pretty big. I just sense that we're getting close. I sense that we are getting very close, and we are getting closer, getting very close to something. We're getting closer because we are getting close. We are definitely getting closer, very close. We are very close. We are close. We are dangerously close to something. We are dead close to something. And I think every day we are inching closer to who killed Charlie Kirk. You know, we're getting close. We're inching ever closer. We are inching closer, a little closer to solving the Charlie Kirk murder. And I'm getting very close. And we are getting very close. But I'm getting closer. I'm getting real close. My prayers are with you, Candace. You are close. We are close. And we're getting closer to the truth. We get closer. We are getting close. Getting close to something. Keep going. And we are definitively.
Okay. The point of that is, if you wanted to launch an investigation with the hope being that you could compile sufficient evidence to actually bring people to justice or to expose them in such a way to where it's blatantly obvious to anybody that can rub two brain cells together that somebody is guilty or significantly implicated in the death of someone you claim to care about, this is not how you do it. This is how you run a true crime podcast. This is how you run something to where you are constantly encouraging people to come back in order to get the latest receipt, the latest bit of evidence, because maybe this time it will have been uncovered. Maybe this time you will have the smoking gun. That's how you would do that. This is not how you conduct an investigation. This is how you conduct a successful podcast. And I take some issue with this because obviously there's people out there that are claiming that Candace Owens had a break with Charlie for years before all of this happened. And then Candace has really put herself into the position of being the only one that truly cares about what happened to Charlie. And not the only one, her and her audience, right? They're the ones that truly care about what happened to Charlie. Everyone else is either in on it, or they're normies, or they're stupid, or they're just going with the official narrative because that's convenient, or because the Jews said so, or whatever it is, right? But I brought this up. I brought this up to somebody that once approached me about Candace. She goes, well, I disagree with you about Candace. I said, okay, what do we disagree about? And she goes, well, I think Candace brings the receipts. And I said, okay, I don't. And the reason why I don't think Candace brings the receipts is because I think what Candace will do is she will take an interesting piece of information, and that information could mean something, or it could be easily explained. But then what will happen is she will take this piece of information and then she will engage in speculation. And she will connect two things that may or may not be connected. She doesn't prove that they're connected. She assumes, or she speculates that they could be connected, or she speculates that it's curious, or that we're just asking questions, or she will suggest that people are hiding things from her and that's why she can't get to the real truth, or she will say that she's in danger and she's under threat and that's why she can't get what she needs to. And again, this could be true. I once said on Tim Pool's show, I said only one of two things can be true here. Either Candace Owens is literally the only person that is actually trying to chase down what happened with Charlie's death, or Candace is Charlie Kirk's biggest enemy, because there's no question that Candace has gone after his wife, gone after his organization. And again, if Erica was implicated in it, well, then it would make sense to go after her. But she has not presented anything in the realm of sufficient evidence to actually make that accusation. And now Candace is doing things like selling hoodies on her website that say Shabbat Shalom, Daddy's home. And that's a direct reference to when Charlie Kirk started celebrating Shabbat. And Erica Kirk was relaying a story where Charlie would come home, put his bag down and say Shabbat Shalom, Daddy's home to his kids. And now Erica's selling hoodies as a way of kind of mocking that. And I look at all this, I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't come to the conclusion that this is an investigation done in good faith. This looks like a gimmick. This looks like a way to really, really drag people along. And not only that, but the way that it's being done with respect to, oh, next episode, we got more evidence. Or constantly putting herself in a position where she's in danger and she needs her audience to protect her and to believe her because she's the voice, she's your voice. I can't help but look at this and go, this seems manipulative, right? Whenever there's any sort of criticism, it's not, well, they bring up a good point, but here's how I explain it. It's like they're on the payroll. They're either on the payroll for the Jews or on Turning Point USA, or they've got something to hide. I mean, she was implicating guys like Frank Turek. Like, come on. Right. When even you got guys like Nick Fuentes going, really? I mean, at some point, where is the accountability here? I'm not telling everyone to hate Candace Owens, but where is the accountability for the way that she's conducting this investigation? Now, juxtapose that with another individual. And this is someone that has done some work and he's questioned some of the things with respect to the FBI's narrative, the FBI story, the bullet, and that's Valhalla VFT. Valhalla VFT was former 1st Special Forces Group. He's got an ARCOM for Valor, which means bona fide war hero. And there are times where I agree with him on his analysis and the conclusions he comes to from it. And there are times when I don't. But you know what I can generally wrap my mind around each and every time is the pattern of information and the pattern of analysis that he's using. So even if I disagree with some of his conclusions, I get where he's coming from. Not only that, but I have seen several times where Valhalla VFT has said, oh, here's new information that explains this. And he'll change his mind based off of new information presented, even if it includes him having to change his mind from a position he once held. So I've seen the guy be convinced by new information. Not only that, but I've seen him bring on other guys on like Matt Taibbi, where they disagree on something, both former special ops guys, they disagree on something and they will have a conversation. And he doesn't think Matt is a sold out shill because Matt disagrees with Valhalla VFT on something. They'll sit there and have a respectful discussion. And they will also, they will appreciate when the other one makes a good point. And they will also recognize that both of them are in the search for truth. They just might be coming to different conclusions based off of the evidence presented. And so when I look at Valhalla VFT questioning something, and he may be questioning a point that Candace is questioning, I listen to his analysis because I understand where it's coming from. I understand that from as best I can tell, it's rooted in a desire to get to the truth, but also a desire to follow logical patterns of analysis in order to arrive there. And then to not engage in outlandish speculation about something based off of imperfect evidence or information. So the reason why I bring up Valhalla VFT is like, I'm not saying that anybody questioning the official narrative is a bad guy. I'm saying that the way that Candace is analyzing this, the sort of speculation she's engaging in, the way she is implying people without sufficient evidence, the way that she is selling things and associated with this investigation, that is the part that I think is questionable. Not people that have honest questions and want to run down different leads. That's the difference here. So I don't appreciate the way that Candace is analyzing this, because I don't think her investigative methods make sense for what she says she wants to do. But when I look at someone like Valhalla VFT, who's also a content creator, but I've also seen him actually be committed to the truth, even when we disagree. And so that's the distinction I want to make, is what's the standard for truth? What's the standard for evidence? Are you careful about the evidence you present and the implications you draw from it? Are you careful about not potentially destroying the lives of an innocent person or innocent organizations, right, in order to get clicks? And the thing is that all of you have heard of Candace Owens. I'm willing to bet a lot of you have never heard of Valhalla VFT. Why? Because he's not engaging in the same sort of clickbaity analysis. And that's what I respect about him. And I wish was respected more within kind of the social media world and the content creation world. All right, before we move on to our next person, I want to thank our partners at Lear Capital, because the bottom line is I watch the stock market go this way and that, as I watch inflationary monetary policy, as I watch one day some stock is on the top of their game and the next day it's tanking. There's a lot of people that are wondering, okay, what does this all mean? And is there anything that I can count on that can actually solidify my long-term retirement, so I don't wake up one day and find out that my stock portfolio is just garbage? And that is where Lear Capital comes in, because while they can help you buy precious metals such as gold or silver, while they can help you add it into your 401k or your IRA, while they can help you do all of that, while they can help you purchase it and actually keep it in your safe at home, if that's the thing that actually gives you security, they are willing to actually give you a free information kit, which kind of explains all the nuances of this without any charge to you. They will just send it to you. They're sending it to you. And if you like what they have to say, great. Then maybe Lear is someone you should do business with when it comes to, again, buttressing your retirement program with precious metals instead of it all being in one stock or whatever else it might be. And the only thing you got to do to get started is you call 800-707-4575. That's 800-707-4575. Or you can visit nick4lear.com. That's Nick, the number 4lear.com. Again, costs you nothing to get this free information packet. Go check it out. We actually did a really interesting interview where we were talking about financial markets. We were talking about the price of gold and what was happening in Iran. And then we actually brought on the CEO from Lear Capital to discuss a little bit about why does gold move in the direction it is, and why is it at all-time record highs, and why does it look like it's probably going to continue to go up on the norm, go up over the foreseeable future. So go check that out at Lear Capital, and we thank them for partnering with us. Okay, let's look at the next person I want to bring up, and that is Nick Fuentes. Okay, so again, when I say that Candace is someone that I used to kind of see as an ally in this movement, and I have appreciated the work that she's done, Nick Fuentes is someone that I generally have not appreciated or very allied myself with. But that's not because everything Nick Fuentes says is wrong. It's because, once again, I disagree with some of the conclusions that he comes to. But there's something specific about Nick Fuentes that, to me, makes it especially insidious. And it's not just the stuff that he says that is kind of overtly racist. That's bad enough on its face. There's actually a debate tactic that he used. I'm going to show you this clip right here. I'm going to explain kind of what I'm talking about. And this clip is not a perfect example of it, but I'll tell you what I mean here in just a second. So let me just show that, and this should probably make it obvious why I just don't ally with someone like Nick Fuentes. So let's go ahead and play it now.
That story is that it was a joke. Okay, I want to come to something else you said. This is where you talk about Jews, women, and blacks. Let's just take a listen.
They're always coming up with, no, it's not the Jews. No, it's not women. No, it's not blacks. It's actually really complicated. No, it isn't at all. Jews are running society. Women need to shut the up. Blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
Okay. Would you like to clarify what you meant there?
That's all true. That's 100% true. Everything I said in that clip is true.
Including that blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part.
Yeah. Yes.
So what's important to understand about this is that he actually goes on later to explain in one of these interviews with Piers Morgan, where, well, what he meant is for the black people that are committing violent crimes. And that's what we call a Motte and Bailey tactic. And to give you an idea, the Motte and Bailey tactic is, well, it's a fallacy. It's a fallacious way of arguing where you essentially make one claim I'll just read it off here. The Motte and Bailey, named after Motte and Bailey Castle, is a form of argument and an informal fallacy where an arguer conflates two positions that share similarities, one modest and easy to defend, the Motte, and one much more controversial and harder to defend, the Bailey. The arguer advances the controversial position, but when challenged, insists that only the more modest position is actually being advanced. Now, I'll give you a perfect example of this because the left uses this tactic all the time. And probably one of the most obvious manifestations of it right now is when they say, oh, toxic masculinity. And they go off about how men are to blame for everything. And men are they're the ones we got to be concerned of. It. If it wasn't for men, and if it wasn't for this toxic masculinity, we'd be fine. And then when you start to challenge them on it, right? Because they discuss masculinity as if it's toxic in general. And then the moment you challenge them, they're like, no, I mean like abusive men. Okay, well, nobody was arguing that mental or physical abuse done on behalf of men isn't toxic. We can all acknowledge that that's a bad thing and it shouldn't be done. But that's not what they were arguing. They were making a much broader argument with respect to toxic masculinity. That was the Bailey. And then when you challenge them, they retreat back to the Motte, right? Which is, no, we're just talking about abuse. We're talking about men who are physically and mentally, verbally abusive of women. Okay, well, nobody's debating that. And they do this all the time, right? And you see it in a variety of ways where they'll say, nobody wants to take your guns. All we're arguing for is common sense gun control, right? That's the Motte tactic. But then when you actually press them on what they want on these things, or they'll make outlandish claims about, school shootings or things like that. And then when you zero in a little bit, they retreat back to whatever the most modest claim is. We just want common sense gun control. And you see this, nobody's indoctrinating your kids, right? Like we see it over and over again on the left. It is a common tactic, and it's one of the ways that they try to move the Overton window to the left. And the problem that I have with Nick Fuentes is that for him, I don't know what the Motte is, and I don't know what the Bailey is, right? He will make these claims because one minute he'll say, oh, no, I'm not racist. I'm Catholic. I'm not allowed to be racist. I'm just engaging in pattern recognition. But then he will say overtly racist things, right? And then when you challenge him on it, he retreats back to, no, I just meant this subset. I just meant this group over here. I'm not saying everybody. I'm just saying this group. And again, that's what I have a problem with, is because when someone regularly engages in that kind of Motte and Bailey tactic, I don't know where they actually stand on the position, right? I don't know where they're actually, I don't know what's true. I don't know what they actually believe. And so it makes it really difficult to say, oh, is this a guy I'm going to associate myself with? And my answer with Fuentes is absolutely not. Because if he was saying that, you know what, I've got a problem with the way that a lot of liberal white women, reject motherhood or reject being a wife and push this hardcore feminism. I have a problem with Simone de Beauvoir or freedom and the feminine mystique. I would have no problems with that. I would understand it. The whole pointing out the liberal, quote, white women is become kind of a funny thing because liberal white women are usually constantly bringing up race as an issue. And so when you bring up them, it's a funny thing. I get that. But a lot of what he's doing, I can't tell where he actually stands. I can't tell what he actually wants. And then he actually engages in like genuinely racist rhetoric. But then when you point it out, someone will say, oh, you're calling him a racist because the left calls everyone a racist. And that's the danger, right? It's this theory. Christian Heinz first used the word inversion to describe it. And it's this idea that because so many people on the right have been inappropriately accused of racism or sexism or misogyny or bigotry or patriarchy, whatever it is, they've been accused of it so much that whenever they get called that, they automatically dismiss it. And whenever somebody that they see as being on their side engages in it, they automatically dismiss it because the left used it as a tactic, not as a meaningful accusation based off of character or behavior. And the problem now is we've got this inversion problem, because it's one thing to say, if you call somebody that I associate on my side a racist, I'm not going to automatically believe you. Right? I'm going to assume that you're lying because that's what you've done for so long. But then if you present actual evidence that the person did engage in something that was actually by definition racist, not the ever increasing broad definition that the left uses, but the actual definition of racism, which is to say that somebody believes in the inherent inferiority or superiority of somebody based off of their race, right? If you can show me where somebody did that, yes, I will properly categorize that as racist because it meets the definition, not because it suits my political objectives. But the left doesn't do that. So the proper response, I think, to the left accusing someone of racism is skepticism, because the left accuses everybody of it. But it's not inversion. It's not to come to the conclusion that if you accuse someone of racism, then it must mean that racism is good, because the left is always accusing people who I agree with on certain things of racism. That's not the proper way to analyze that, right? The fact that the left calls everyone a Nazi and I don't like the left doesn't mean maybe the Nazis had a point to make. That's not what that means. They can still be bad. They can still be bad. I just don't accept the way that the left defines it. It's same thing with fascism, same thing with threat to democracy, all of it, right? But we shouldn't allow the left's misuse of a term to convince people on the right, oh, well, then maybe that group or maybe that thing or maybe that organization wasn't so bad. No, they were bad. They were definitely bad. Fascism is a left-wing ideology. It just has certain elements that they keep from the right. But in the end, they still want central planning of the economy. They still want a strong totalitarian government. They still want all the things that we don't like. They still want a lot of things that we generally associate with even elements of communism or socialism. So it's not as if these are good things because the left has inappropriately used them as accusations. So again, the test that I use on this is if somebody on the right is saying something, and maybe they're saying things that I generally agree with, maybe 70% of what they say, I was like, yes, I think they have properly diagnosed certain problems, but I don't think they've diagnosed other problems well. And here's what I've seen with certain elements on the right. They have come up with, this is what explains everything, right? This is the problem. This is my enemy. This is the out camp. This is the other tribe. And once I've identified that other tribe as being the enemy, it doesn't matter how much you disagree with me. The moment you disagree that that tribe is responsible for everything, you're the bad guy. You've been paid off. You're a cuck. You're whatever. That's the other element that I see people engaging in that I do not agree with, because once again, it departs from logic. It departs from what you might call genuine pattern recognition. And it veers off into this idea of, no, this explains everything. And I've seen this before. I've seen this before where I will agree with somebody on taxes. I will agree with somebody on the Second Amendment. I will agree with somebody on immigration. I will agree with somebody on foreign wars, right? But at the end of the day, if I don't agree with them on this one thing, then I'm the bad guy. And the person that I want to bring up as a juxtapose to this, to Nick Fuentes, is Charlie Kirk. Because if you look at Charlie Kirk was never afraid to hold his own side to account. He was never afraid to go after Republicans. In fact, he regularly challenged Republicans. He regularly tried to primary Republicans. He would go after, when he disagreed with Donald Trump on things, he would advocate very, very hard. Like he did not want us getting involved in a ground war in Iran. You could argue he didn't want any war in the Middle East or Iran. Right. So once again, it's not that Charlie Kirk was just a sold out hack for Donald Trump or a sold out hack for any Republican. He clearly was not. He actually had a very consistent and coherent religious and political philosophy that he advocated for. He advocated for Christianity, and he advocated for what you might call a more traditional conservatism based upon Christianity as a foundation that provided objective truth and morality for it. But what that meant is that whenever Charlie Kirk advocated for something, if you had a problem with Charlie, you could point to scripture, or you could make a logical case, and Charlie would say, oh, that's a good point. He wouldn't automatically consider you his enemy because, one, you questioned him, or two, you disagreed with him on a particular topic. Right. And again, he didn't consider Donald Trump an enemy because he might have disagreed with something Donald Trump was doing in a particular case. He would say, well, logically, when I've got Donald Trump over here and I've got Kamala Harris over here, Donald Trump is my ally. So how do I help Donald Trump in order to influence Donald Trump in order to get the best possible conservative outcome I want? And to the extent that I'm going to disagree, I can disagree with him, but I'm going to present logic. I'm not going to automatically assume that he's been paid off by somebody or he's actually a hack, right? If somebody has demonstrated themselves in multiple different categories, but they've fallen short in other ones, well, then the logical standpoint is not to say, oh, you're just like everybody else. That's not the logical conclusion. The logical conclusion is to say, wow, I really appreciate these things over here, but I don't appreciate these things. So how do we improve this? And Charlie Kirk held his own moral viewpoints, his own arguments to a logically consistent standard. And that's why he would get in fights with people that would be allies. But he always did it in a way that, again, made sense to me. Just like with Valhalla VFT. I don't always agree with him, but I understand what he's arguing from. I understand the nature of his arguments. I understand that there's a standard for truth that we can appeal to. I have no doubt that if I disagreed with Charlie Kirk or Valhalla VFT, I could present evidence in such a way to where they would say, oh, that makes sense. Okay, I need to adjust my thinking. And that's critical. That's critical for conservative thought. All right, let's go to the last person that we're going to address right here. And that is Tucker Carlson. And so I'm going to show you some clips here. And again, the argument is going to be that I'm just picking on Tucker Carlson, or I'm selectively editing stuff. I'm going to show you a clip that he was very proud of, and I'm going to show you a clip that he's probably not as proud of. But we're just going to analyze the way that he's assessing things. Okay, so that's all we're doing here. I'm not asking anybody to hate Tucker Carlson. I just want to bring something up that I think is relevant and important. All right, so this is the how many people live in Iran question that he asked to Ted Cruz.
How many people live in Iran, by the way? I don't know the population at all. No, I don't know the population. You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple? What's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and
What percent?
predominantly Shia. Okay,
It's not even. You don't know anything about Iran. So
Okay,
actually,
I am not the Tucker Carlson
but
expert on Iran.
You're a
who
senator
says,
who's calling
okay,
for the
you're the one who
overthrow of the
claims-
government.
you're the
and
one
you
who
don't know anything
claims-
about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country.
Republicans are
Okay, so that was a commonly shared clip, and a lot of people were, depending on how you viewed this. Some people were saying that Tucker did a real kind of gotcha thing with Ted Cruz, and the other side would say, well, no, if Ted Cruz actually wants to advocate regime change in Iran, he should know basic things about the population, the ethnic breakdown, because that's all going to factor in whether or not this is actually possible. And I would say that that's a good point. Now the question is for Tucker to then conclude because you don't know. First of all, he asked him the population. He said he didn't know. Now, I'm sure if he guessed, he would probably have made it within, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20% of what the population was, but I don't know that, right? But Tucker had just looked it up because Tucker knew he was going to ask the question. And then Tucker starts to talk about the ethnic breakdown. And Ted Cruz begins to say, well, it's predominantly Persian, predominantly Shia. And then at that point, Tucker interrupts him. Now, understand something. What Ted Cruz was saying in that moment was not incorrect. It is predominantly Persian. It's about 60% Persian. And it is predominantly Shia Islam. But Tucker then interrupts him and says, you want to topple this country, you don't know anything about it. Okay, well, Tucker hadn't proven that case because Ted Cruz didn't off the top of his head know the actual population numbers or the complete ethnic breakdown of Iran doesn't mean he doesn't know anything about Iran. And it certainly doesn't mean that he doesn't know anything about the Islamic regime and what it's been doing to the region and to the United States since 1979. And this is the part that frustrates me with respect to Tucker on some of these questions that he asks, is that he goes very, very hard on someone that, quite frankly, probably agrees with Tucker about 70% of the time. But then he'll bring on somebody else who may disagree with him a lot, who may have wildly different objectives for how to run society than Tucker Carlson. But provided that whoever the guest is agrees with Tucker on Israel or the Jews or Winston Churchill, all of a sudden that person doesn't get any tough questions. And I want to juxtapose this with an interview that was done with Mike Huckabee, where all of a sudden Mike Huckabee kind of got the best of Tucker Carlson. So let's go ahead and take a look at this right now. This is a little bit longer. Oh, sorry, volume.
Christians are not doing very well. They're not doing very well in the Muslim-controlled countries. There's almost no Christians in Qatar, for example, except those who live in the Christian ghetto, who are the service workers.
I'm sorry. And look, I don't want to argue with you. There are many more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel.
That's not true.
what it actually is true. And I refer you to Wikipedia, Mr. Ambassador.
Wikipedia,
I refer you to the government of Qatar.
Okay, this is the part two that drives me a little bit nuts. He refers him to Wikipedia. Now, listen, I use Wikipedia for stuff, but I'm not going to come to my final conclusion about something. The way I typically use Wikipedia is I'll look at what it has to say because it generally does a good summary of things, but I always know it's coming from a left-wing bias. And how do I know that? Because I've talked to the co-founder of Wikipedia, who is adamant about Wikipedia basically engaging in ideological capture, that it's become intellectually dishonest. The reason why it still has some value is that to the extent that you can look at summaries of things, and then it provides links to where that information came from, so you can check original sources. But for Tucker to honestly, well, just check Wikipedia. And then he'll say, well, and you can see Mike Huckabee going, Wikipedia? Like, we all know this is owned by the left wing. And then, we'll check with the government of Qatar. The government of Qatar has nice things to say about the government of Qatar. Can you imagine Huckabee looking back at Tucker Carlson and say, well, just check with the government of Israel? Tucker wouldn't accept that. But he does accept Wikipedia when it reinforces what he wants, and he accepts the government of Qatar when it reinforces what he wants. But this is the part that Tucker really gets kind of slammed with.
The government of Israel, these are knowable facts. I'm in Jordan, by the way,
numbers are down. In Syria, the numbers are down. In
I'm
Lebanon,
just
the
saying,
numbers are down.
there
I'm just
are
telling you that
about twice as many Christians.
but they live in
Hold
the
on.
enclave. They are not native Qataris.
Okay, we're mixing so many different categories
Yeah.
here. I'm just saying I get things wrong all the time. You've just gotten something wrong, and I think it's important to acknowledge it. There are many more Christians in Qatar than there are in Israel. Fact.
How many?
Now you caught me. I don't know. I can look at my phone, but I was just there, and there are many more. Like, whatever.
Yeah, you see that? It was so I guess using Tucker's logic, Mike Huckabee could then go back and say, you claim to know about Christians in the Middle East, but you don't even know anything about it, Tucker. Like, would it have been fair for Mike Huckabee to now do to Tucker Carlson what Tucker Carlson did to Ted Cruz? Right? If we're being intellectually honest, the answer would be yes. Because one of the things that Huckabee was pointing out here is there's a big difference between Qatar or the UAE or other countries in the Middle East, which have a vast foreign population. Many of them come from the Philippines. Many of them come from other countries in Southeast Asia or whatnot, where they might have different religious beliefs, or they might have Christian beliefs. Again, especially if they come from Philippines, where we have a large Catholic population. And they come into Qatar, and they live in little areas which are specifically for service workers. And in those areas, they're allowed to have churches. But if they leave that area and they attempt to proselytize, if they attempt to find a church, there is none. It's against the law. And the fact that Tucker Carlson is essentially accepting this narrative from Qatar, which, by the way, spends billions on lobbying the United States government, billions on influencing higher ed within the United States and around the world. The fact that he would accept this narrative, because Tucker is smart enough to know better. He knows that there's not like some large Qatari Christian population where they can go to church or they can engage in evangelism or they can do any of that stuff. Basically, if you're a Christian in Israel, you can be a Christian in Israel. This idea that Christians are just horribly persecuted in Israel, I'm sorry, that's just not factual. That's not factual. But if you're a Christian and you try to go out and like proselytize in Iraq or in Saudi Arabia, like, that's against the law. You can face very, very serious penalties for that. And Tucker is pretending like that doesn't happen or that doesn't exist. The other thing Tucker has started in on is this whole idea, and it's similar with Fuentes and it's similar with Candace, but it's the whole idea of Israel explains everything, or the Jews explain everything. And again, I'm going to juxtapose this with somebody else here in a minute. Anybody that has I have regularly defended Thomas Massey. I don't think Thomas Massey should be primaried. I don't think that Donald Trump should be going after Thomas Massey the way he is. I just don't. That's not because I agree with Thomas Massey on everything. We disagree on some stuff. And we've had conversations about it before. But by the same token, usually when Massey talks about things, I understand the logic that he's using. And he's very intellectually consistent. Now, I get a little frustrated with Thomas Massey when I think he overemphasizes one point while seemingly ignoring others. But in the end, I can bring that point up to Thomas Massey, and provided that I present evidence, he will say, okay, yeah, I accept that, or I concede that particular point. I'm looking at Tucker Carlson. He's not conceding any points here, or at least it doesn't appear to be. And when you're not willing to acknowledge the verifiable fact that in most of places in the Middle East, they've eradicated most of their Jewish populations, and they've allowed for the systematic destruction of Christian populations. But then you want to put all the emphasis on Israel as being really, really hostile to Christianity, when again, I've been there. That certainly wasn't my experience. It's not the experience of the Christians I know who live in Israel. And so I look at Tucker, I'm like, what is the deal here? But again, it all has to go back to Israel explains everything. And that's not to say that Israel doesn't have influence on our foreign policy. I believe that they do. It's not to say they don't have influence in other aspects. I believe that they do. I believe other countries do as well, based off of the amount of money they spend in lobbying in the United States. And anybody that wants to say, I'm uncomfortable with this, cool. But Israel explains everything, or the Jews explain everything, has become the right-wing equivalent of anything I don't agree with is racist. Anything I don't agree with is sexist. Do you see what I mean? Like, I'm watching it being used. I'm watching what I have always seen as a left-wing argument now being used by prominent members on the right, but for very specific topics. And Israel's become one of them. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I have done episodes where I've said I am critical of Israel on this and this and this, but I generally support what they're doing here, here, and here. And the answer is, well, Nick, I don't think I don't think this is an appropriate position to take on this point, but I concede this point. Or Nick, I don't think you're giving enough weight to this problem that happened over here with Israel, like the USS Liberty or something like that. And I'll say, okay, well, no, that's not what I get. What I get is, oh, you've been paid off. So you see what I mean? Like, the standard is not evidence. The standard is, if you don't fit in my camp, which uses Israel or the Jews to explain everything, then you're a bad guy. And I don't care that you agree with me on the Second Amendment or taxes or immigration or foreign wars. I don't care that you agree with me on wanting to reduce the size of the federal government or cut out federal bureaucracy. I don't care that you agree with me on abortion. I don't care that you agree with me that transing the kids is bad. No. If you don't agree with me on this topic right here around Israel or the Jews, then you're my enemy. And I see this becoming more and more prominent with certain members on the right. And the moment I see it, my immediate thing is, I'm going to disregard that. Right? When Thomas Massey says, I have a problem with what I think Israel did in this situation, I'm like, okay, good. Let's analyze that. I might disagree with you. I might agree with you, but let's analyze it. But when I see the immediate, the instantaneous, nope, you don't associate all the world's problems here, or you don't associate a sufficient amount of the world's problems here, therefore you are my enemy, and I don't care what you believe about anything else. I'm like, yes, I recognize this. It's usually used on the left. Now let's do a juxtapose on this, specifically with the war in Iran. Because obviously Dave Smith, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, all of them very, very much against the war in Iran. But then they were so against it, they almost end up defending the Iranian regime. And I'm like, wait a second. You can absolutely believe that the United States should not be over there while still acknowledging that Iran has a horrific regime. You can acknowledge that Israel might have given us intel, which led us to make certain decisions, without believing that Israel's the only reason we went into Iran. I saw this with Joe Kent. I was like, Joe, you acknowledged for 6 years that Iran was a threat to the United States, that was killing our troops, that was doing all of these things. But then when you resigned, everything was about Israel. And it's like, wait a second. If you want to make an argument that you think Israel might have contributed to our participation, sure, that makes sense. I get that. Israel's always seen Iran as an existential threat to them for good reason. But Saudi Arabia also sees them as a threat. UAE sees them as a threat. Right? They shout death to America. Why can't I hold the belief that Iran is a threat to the United States while simultaneously holding the belief that we probably shouldn't engage in a nation building exercise in Iran? Which, by the way, has been my position. What I've said since the beginning of this was, listen, Donald Trump has demonstrated to me that he understands that nation building is a bad idea. I believe that he believes that. Now, it could be wrong, but that's what I believe he believes. And so when he has used the U.S. military for punitive expeditions or other things like that, I've generally seen him doing it as a way that is more trustworthy than George W. Bush doing it, or Barack Obama doing it, or Joe Biden doing it. And so I've been willing to give Donald Trump, in my analysis, I've been willing to give Donald Trump like more leeway than I would other people. But that's not that's not I trust him no matter what he does. It means to say that I'm willing to give him more room to work than I would any other president, in my lifetime, with the possible exception of Ronald Reagan. And another guy that I see doing that is Matt Walsh. So I want to show you some things from Matt Walsh here, because again, I think this is one of the distinctions that that I make whenever I'm reviewing this stuff, is that Matt Walsh has several times brought up his concerns with respect to the war in Iran. And here's a good example of it. Here's a good example of this one right here, because I think he kind of nails some of the unfair criticism coming from elements of right. So right here he says, I am at once told that I am an isolationist because I am a cynical sellout in it for the cash, and that my position is wildly unpopular and out of step with the vast majority of the audience. Idiots can't even get their ad hominem attacks straight. If the pro-war position really is so hugely popular, then obviously the smart sellout play is to support it, not oppose it. Morons. If you're going to impugn my character, at least do it coherently. So this is this is what I love about Matt, right? Because on the other side of this, the people that some of the people are supporting the war in Iran exclusively because they're very, very pro-Trump and they just trust Trump to handle these things. Okay. I've said that I have a much higher degree of Donald Trump than I have any other president in my lifetime, with the possible, Reagan would be on par. And again, it's not because I agreed with Reagan on everything, but what Matt Walsh is saying is like, wait a second, am I a sellout and in it for the cash? And if I'm a sellout and in it for the cash, but this war is super popular, then why wouldn't I just regurgitate everything the administration is saying? He's basically saying, like, if you're going to attack me, can you please get it right? Can you please make a logical argument for why you think I'm wrong about this? And again, I think that's an excellent. I understand that reasoning, right? Because he's saying that there's a contradiction here that doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Now, here's another one I want to talk about here that Matt Walsh brought up. He goes, yes, I am gravitating in a certain direction by being skeptical of U.S. interventionism, as I've been loudly in public for as long as I've had a platform. This is a new development. This general point of view I've had for the past 15 years is an ominous sign. Yes, good point, David. You're an astute observer. Again, he's making fun of this idea where they're saying that, well, Matt Walsh is gravitating closer to Megyn and Tucker. And by the way, this is also the element of the right that I have an issue with, on kind of the other side of Tucker and Candace and whatnot, where they will say that anybody that brings up a similar point, which is to say that they might find themselves on the same side as Tucker Carlson when it comes to war in Iran, is therefore gravitating toward Tucker. No, if you look at what Matt Walsh is arguing, and Matt Walsh did this really, really good tweet where he said, look, I believe in an American first foreign policy. And the way he essentially described it was, he said, if there is a high benefit and a low cost, he goes, I think that makes sense. And then he gave examples. He said, like Greenland. Greenland was something where we were saber rattling a little bit, right? We were using certainly economic power, and there was even talk of military power. And then what did we get? Well, we got everything. Did we take Greenland? No, but the objective was to kick China out with respect to getting rare earth minerals, and to allow the U.S. to be able to mine rare earth minerals at the same time that we could set up military infrastructure for our own national security and the security for NATO. And Trump essentially got all of that without the additional cost of buying Greenland. And so Matt Walsh is saying, yes, that makes sense. High benefit, low cost. And then he looked at Venezuela. He goes, I supported Venezuela. That was a military intervention. But why did I support it? He goes, I thought it was high benefit, low cost. Because when you get over to Iran, and Matt Walsh is even willing to say, like, look, you will never see Matt Walsh defending the Iranian regime like you will some of these other guys. You'll never see him defending essentially the Islamic Republican Guard Corps. No, Matt Walsh has said, no, I acknowledge they're bad guys. I don't like them. They hate the United States. And Matt Walsh will even say, yes. And if you could get a better regime in there, that would be good. That would be. So he acknowledges all of the points that are critical. And again, I haven't seen Matt do this, but I'm sure Matt would say that, I don't think Matt would find it outlandish if somebody said, hey, I think the Israelis might have pushed us into this, in a way that maybe we didn't want to do it. I think Matt Walsh would probably say, well, Israel sees Iran as an existential threat. Obviously, they see the United States as an ally. They would like U.S. support for doing this. And so it's not unusual if Israel would say, hey, we think now is the time to strike, and then try to present information or intelligence in order to do that. I think Matt would come to the conclusion that there is a reasonable argument to be made on how Israel might have pushed the U.S. to be involved in Iran, but Israel doesn't explain everything. What Matt would say is, no, there's a long history of Iran and the United States attacking one another, fighting one another. We clearly don't agree with one another. And so there's ample reason for the United States to not like the Iranian regime, irrespective of Israel. But he can also make a logical argument for why Israel might have been more involved in these particular strikes, right? Or trying to get the United States involved with the timing that they wanted, right? Again, I look at all of that, I'm like, yep, makes sense to me. Makes sense to me. And that's the thing with Matt. I understand where he's coming from. I understand the line of reasoning that he is using. What Matt is saying is, Matt's not saying, I don't want a better government in Iran. Matt's saying, I am not convinced by what I've seen so far that the conditions on the ground exist for there to be successful regime change in Iran without the presence of massive amounts of U.S. ground troops. Because Matt doesn't believe that massive amounts of ground troops should be deployed to Iran to overthrow their government or to try to set up a new one, because that would be a lot more like nation building, not a punitive expedition. He's saying, I don't know that I support this. I completely understand his reasoning. Right? It's logical. It's consistent. It fits into a pattern that Matt has laid out for a long time. And it's been very simple. This is what Matt believes. If it falls within that, well, that makes sense and something he should support. If it falls outside of that, he's going to ask more questions to determine whether or not it should fall within what he believes or outside of what he believes. If it remains on the outside, he's going to be critical of it until you present sufficient evidence to convince him that it should be something that he supports. Perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. And this is what I'm hoping wins out when it comes to the right. Because I have no problem with people questioning official narratives. I have no problem with people holding the right accountable. I have no problem with them going after Republican politicians. Ladies and gentlemen, please believe me when I tell you this. Like, I challenged an incumbent Republican when I first ran for office, and he decided to retire. Why did I challenge him? Because he'd taken a couple bad votes on tax policy in a really, really red district, right? My wife challenged a 27-year Republican incumbent senator in Virginia. Why? Because as a Republican from an R+70 district, he had voted for pro-abortion policy and he had voted for bad tax policy. And so we wanted to hold them to account. My family didn't just talk about it on X. We spent our own time and money and paid a price for holding Republicans accountable when they didn't do what we thought Republicans should do. But there was always a logically consistent argument that we were making. And there was a threshold where it was like, look, I know we won't agree on everything, but once you cross certain boundaries, I'm now going to stand up and I'm going to challenge you on it. But there was also always a pathway if that other individual wanted to say, okay, I see what you're saying. And I'm either going to adjust action or I'm going to try to explain to you why you might be wrong. We were always open to hearing that, provided that there was a standard for truth and an objective process whereby we could arrive at it. But we have now entered into this period where I am watching things that are not inherently, these are not principled positions. I'm watching people just say, I have decided that this is true. I have decided this explains everything. And the moment you don't agree with me on that one point, I exclude you. And I'm like, okay, you're excluding me now because I'm not going to follow you down that route. Why? Because it looks like a left-wing arguing tactic. It looks like a left-wing point. It looks like a Saul Alinsky strategy that you're now trying to apply toward a right-wing objective, theoretically. And then some of them are not even right-wing objectives. So that's the point I'm trying to make. When it comes to these controversial issues, whether it's Charlie Kirk's assassination, whether it's Israel, whether it's U.S. foreign policy, whether it's social issues or whatever it is, I don't mind people speaking their mind. I don't mind people following leads. But where is the consistent standard for truth? How is the logic being applied? And can I just ask this question with a lot of this stuff? If you were the one being accused of something, whether it's Candace Owens' thought process for going after Erica, whether it's some of the Fuentes stuff when it comes after going after broad groups or categories of people, whether it's Tucker, zeroing in on one particular point, but then ignoring other ones which are also relevant to the broader conversation. If that was happening to you, would you think you were being dealt with in a just manner? And if the answer is no, then you have to start looking at this from the perspective of, maybe I agree with what some of this guy is saying, but one of the things that, again, should inform the right is this idea that if objective truth is our overall goal, and what we're trying to do is to align our beliefs in association with objective truth, then there has to be there has to be recognizable standards that we use to arrive there. And when people abide by those standards, like Valhalla VFT, like Charlie Kirk, like Matt Walsh, well, then we should invite all of that into the conversation and be able to have good discussions. And when they don't, we should be correcting for that. We should be saying, look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to follow this line of reasoning because you tell me to. There has to be a standard by which I can judge what you're saying, that you can't just accuse me of being paid off or being a horrible human being. And again, I'm not just accusing Tucker, Fuentes, and Candace of doing it. I see people on the other side of these arguments, whether it's with supporters of Donald Trump, whether it's supporters of the war in Iran, whether it's supporters of Israel. I see them also engaging in that kind of tactic where it's the moment you don't agree with me on this one thing, we're no longer allies. I put you in a different camp. So when it comes to me, like, look, and I'll mention each one of these things. When it comes to Charlie Kirk, I think the preponderance of evidence at this point suggests that Tyler Robinson killed Charlie Kirk. I think there's some inconsistencies that deserve to be analyzed. And I don't think anybody should be ostracized for wanting to analyze some of those inconsistencies, especially when it comes to things like the rifle, the bullets, etc. But there is not sufficient evidence to try to take down Turning Point USA or to try to denigrate Erica Kirk. There is not sufficient evidence for that. Now, if you believe that they're implicated in some way, great. Go gather the evidence. And when you have enough of it, go make your argument. But right now, it just looks like you're trying to tear down the woman that Charlie picked over you. That's my honest assessment. When it comes to things like looking at pattern recognition, let's make sure it's consistent pattern recognition. And let's not engage at the same thing the left does, which is to say that, nope, if you fit into this particular group, this is now who you are. You're the bad guy. You're in that tribe, you're the bad guy. Especially when it comes to immutable characteristics like being a woman, like biology or ethnicity. Right? There's a difference between arguing something based off of political, social, theological norms. Why? Because these are adopted positions. If you choose a bunch of positions, whether it be political, economic, social, theological, that I disagree with, I'm going to call out those positions. If there's a culture which incorporates those positions, like Marxist ideology, I'm going to call out that ideology. I think Marxism is evil. But I'm not going to take an immutable characteristic and say, no, if you're this, then you're the bad guy. And I'm not going to permit language being used which pushes that as a Motte and Bailey tactic where you say all of this, the vast majority of these people belong in prison. Really? Okay, well, no, it's only these people who have done X. I'm not accepting that Motte and Bailey tactic, because when you do that, I don't know which is the Motte and which is the Bailey. I don't know what you actually believe. And then when it comes to this one group explains everything, I'm sorry. Again, going back, Charlie Kirk was willing to challenge his own side, but you always understood where he was coming from, and you understood his line of reasoning. When it comes to Tucker, it's the same problem. Like when Tucker criticizes Iran, he tends to use a singular pattern of evidence for it. When Matt Walsh challenges Iran, he uses multiple patterns of evidence. It's all intellectually consistent, and I understand where he's coming from. I don't think I could convince. I don't think there's a piece of evidence that I could use to convince Tucker Carlson that Israel isn't behind it. Maybe there is. I don't know, but I don't think so. And from what I've seen, I don't think that's true. But with Matt, if there was new information that came on the ground, for instance, if you came out and you said, hey, Matt, the reason why these strikes are going is because we actually have intel from multiple Iranian army units that they're about ready to defect, and they were just looking for enough space in order to do it. Matt would say, oh, That's a new piece of information that could potentially change the dynamic. Because if the Iranian people using defected elements from the Iranian military are going to overthrow the Iranian government, okay, that's a domestic overthrow. And maybe the United States military having a limited involvement in order to create space for that to happen could be beneficial. That could change the cost benefit analysis thing. But then Matt would also say, okay, but how good is your intel on that? Because it doesn't seem to be transparent. You see what I mean? That's a logically consistent form of analysis that I totally get. Makes total sense to me. That's what I'd like to see more of. So when it comes to my position on all of this, the right eating the right, I don't expect the right to be a monolithic organization that all agrees on the same thing. I don't expect the right to have blind loyalty to any particular politician or course of action or foreign policy strategy or domestic policy. I don't expect that. I do expect there to be a coherent and consistent standard for truth that we can follow. And even then, here's what we also need to recognize when it comes to applying that standard for truth. Because if my standard for truth, let's say, for instance, for families, is that marriage is between one man and one woman, and you shouldn't engage in infidelity. Well, the other said, well, Trump was supporting LGBTQ and he cheated on his wives. Yes, I acknowledge that. I'm not excusing that. I disagree with him on that. But if my choice is between Trump and Kamala Harris, there's no question what the better choice is in that binary. So do you see what I'm looking for here? I'm looking for what's our objective standard for truth that all of us can be held accountable to. How can we make good decisions when we have a binary option before us, or effectively a binary option before us, where we've got to choose the best thing that we can get, and then how do we work to try to make it better without surrendering on our principles? That's what I hope will define the right. Anyways, those are my points. Again, not asking you to hate any of the people I've talked about. I'm just trying to come up with some sort of coherent thing that we can all use that makes sense, where we can hold others to account, but we can also allow our own reasoning to be held to account. And I invite the same thing to be done for me, right? Again, I've said this before when I talk to student groups about everything from politics to masculinity to Christianity. The first thing I do is I try to get up there on stage. I want to tell you right now, I always tell the audience, I want to tell you right now, I'm going to talk to you about a lot of things that I have learned over time. I am not holding myself up as the standard. I'm not the standard. Christ is the standard. And yes, it's an unattainable one, but we all end up being better by striving for it. So I'm going to talk about the things I've learned, and I'm going to talk about what I try to do to live up to that standard with the acknowledgement that I have not. So I hope that's what I've done here. I look forward to the comments. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you next episode.